Hi, dear ones. I want to share with you one of my very favorite passages from a 14th century Kashmiri feminine mystic who went by the name of Lala Ded. And her words, I think, are very apt to these times that we're in. She said, "On the way home, the difficulties can feel like being ground by a millstone, like night coming at noon, like lightning through the clouds. But don't worry. What must come, comes. Face everything with love as your mind dissolves in God." There's so many things that are really difficult that we're all facing right now at a level that I don't think any of us have had to deal with like this before. The coronavirus pandemic has upended everything that we've known, and it's going on and on as the infection rates continue to rise. And I don't think any of one of us could have expected that we would have to be social distancing and not able to just connect with one another in the usual ways, and even be doing a service, a Sunday service in this format. So it's not just that, there's also the very difficult financial challenges that are now here because of the knock-on effect of this situation and the incredibly difficult impact financially on so many people's lives. Those who've lost their jobs or their livelihoods or their businesses, or those of us who just really don't know what our situation is going to be and are having to just adjust and adapt to new ways of doing things and living on less, various things I'm sure that you're having to face and figure out. Many of us are also, feeling a lot of grief at the collective situation right now where there's so much tension and polarization, and we might have very strong feelings about the need for social reforms. You might have been very enlivened and impassioned by the Black Lives Matter movement, as I have been. But also, we're now seeing such a backlash of extreme racism and politicization of these important issues that it's really not easy to be with, not to mention what's happening in the lead up to the election. And then, of course, recently there's smoke in the air and it's fire season here in California. Not easy stuff. So I'm sure, like everybody I know, you're going through many different waves of emotion and internal weather in relation to all of this and what it means for you in your life. So I know some people, and I have this is my situation too on many days, where I can see sometimes the gift in this. Perhaps the gift in this for you is offering more spaciousness that perhaps allows you to really deepen in your formal spiritual practices. Maybe there's a simplification happening in your life where you don't actually mind so much the things that have dropped away. Perhaps there's some surprising insights about what's truly nourishing to you and what you were doing but that really isn't authentic, really isn't truly nourishing. Maybe you're communing more with nature and enjoying that. Maybe you're dropping deeper with the people you live with. Or maybe you're tackling the important things in your life that you've been putting off, that are important to be tackled and faced and dealt with. So this time that's immensely difficult has many silver linings, as I'm sure you're finding out. And it's important that we open to the grace even within these fierce conditions and work with them in the ways that the mystery is nudging us each to do. But at the same time, we mustn't bypass the human suffering and the human challenges. We mustn't Pollyanna or deny the places where it sometimes feels like we're being ground by the millstone, and be appropriately compassionate with ourselves and with one another in the face of these things. there is great suffering here at a level that I don't think any of us could fathom. It's hard to fathom. We see over 180,000 people have lost their lives to this coronavirus, and arguably that could have been prevented. It's really hard to see so many people out of work and the impact of what that really means, which is immense hardship for some of the people who were the most disadvantaged to begin with. It's painful how unfair that is, and it's painful to see the cracks of the society that collectively we had built that really doesn't serve us all. And while I'm sure you can see that there's possibly a constructive element to all of this, the possibility to address things that haven't been working collectively and also personally, we're also in a time of increased, intense polarization. And I'm sure you can see what I'm seeing, which is that it's bringing out some very beautiful things in many people, some really noble truths and goodness in healthcare workers and essential workers, and a level of kindness towards one another, in ordinary ways that really we've needed a lot more of. But that the opposite is also true. We're seeing intense ugliness and hatred and polarization and racism and dehumanization, and that's likely to be getting more intense as we approach the election. So it's hard to bear, I know. A big part of what I wanted to teach, why I wanted to share with you about the absolute heart of compassion today, because that's certainly how I'm working with it. Personally, for myself, I have never paid as much attention to what's going on in the world as I am these days, and it feels for me very important, even though many friends and people I know are saying, oh, I don't watch the news, it's all fear. Personally, I disagree. While we want to pay attention to the source of what we're taking in and be discriminating, nevertheless, I think this is a very powerful and important time not to be ducking our head in the sand, but to learn how to engage our spiritual practice as we meet what's so that somehow the intersection of what's really going on, these very powerful and intense forces of our time, can not be seen as, something that's separate from our life of prayer, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. It's really one stream. So the spiritual attitude and approach that really I share with you is one of being in the world from a consciousness beyond it, so we can serve its evolution. And to me that feels very important and meaningful, but it's not easy. So I notice that I have to engage my spiritual practice as I watch the news every night and discuss what's happening with my husband. And I notice various reactions coming up that I'm sure you have too. It's hard. How could we not feel upset or angry or have various emotions arise when we see a death toll like we're seeing, when we see, people not getting basic needs met that they should, when we see politicians, politicizing something rather than serving, when we see deception and lies and injustice and hatred. It's not easy. So I believe that the kind of spiritual maturity that's needed now is to learn how to deepen in our practice of presence, to learn how to stay present from a new depth of heart that can meet it all from a consciousness that is untainted by this world, and that can let a heavenly healing breeze move through us and move us into not just compassion but also compassionate action and living. So when I was in my 20s, I spent a little bit of time practicing as a Sufi within a Western order, and I was very moved one day when we did a zikr, which is a a mantra practice in that tradition. And the zikr was working with the phrase, out of the womb of the human heart, God is born. Now, I can't say that in my early 20s I understood the meaning of that zikr, but I felt it. I felt the power of it. I felt the movement of it. I felt intuitively the truth of it. But it wasn't until decades later, after the awakening in Ramana Maharshi's cave, where I really understood this term that's not really a term that is used, the absolute. So the absolute is really a word that can't be described, but it really is that depth where everything is dissolved, where everything is dissolved and resolved, where everything empties out into the great void. And so when we deepen, either through meditation or we slip into it, we allow that depth of surrender, and we somehow slip into the absolute. There's no more me, you, this, that, good, bad, right, wrong. There's no more duality, there's no more division. Everything gets deep and dark and very silent and quiet and soft and infinitely spacious. It's truly the 0 point or the home. It's the birth, it's the womb of the universe, out of which all of the qualities that are most important are born, out of which everything that is of essence, pure, can emerge and emerge infinitely and spontaneously. So for me, when I enter this depth of the heart, it feels as if I'm entering into a depth of heart that is deeper than just my emotions, and even deeper than like the love that I feel. And I feel a lot of love, right? I'm sure you do too. But when you feel into perhaps like the source of your love, like what is it that causes you to feel love? I mean, you can't answer that question with your mind, but it can help you journey there into that origin of your love, which isn't a someone or a something, and it doesn't belong to anyone, and it's not a thing. But this source of our love, our goodness, that we don't even own, but that is just the depth of our being. Sometimes for me, well, often for me, feels like my heart is backing into the infinite universe, as if the heart that we're familiar with has like a trap door we didn't know about, and that all of a sudden it opens, and there's an infinity, there's a totality, there's a universality, there's a vastness, and it's us. It's our heart. It is the heart. And so out of that infinite openness and spaciousness and emptiness, there is infinite possibility and compassion and every quality that is needed to help us address the impossible sufferings, both the dense, difficult, hurt, closed, stubborn parts of ourself that show up as the patterns of our life, that show up as our repetitive habits of attention and our fixations and our neurotic stuff, even though we might understand that it's not really real, but still shows up, still presents itself as an obscuration, right? That represents our suffering. Any limitation in you is essentially some form of suffering. Any fear, any anxiety, any habit of control represents your suffering. And so is true clunky, egocentric, difficult, painful behavior that comes out of any human being is suffering at the root. It's ignorance of who and what we really are, ignoring what's real, ignoring deep truths, out of touch with the reality of the situation, which is that we're all part of the same one. And what's true and right and natural is to treat one another well, kindly, with respect, to not take the appearance of physical difference to be the reality, and to not make color of skin or race or, any other physical distinction mean that anyone is more or less than anyone else. How could that possibly be? It's all God, right? So when we enter this depth of the heart, all of that nonsense that causes so much trouble here just dissolves. It's resolved. None of it's real. None of it matters. And all of it is kind of unwound. We can find refuge. It all can find refuge. And we can be here with all of that from a depth of heart that is not only spacious and kind and understanding, but it's also wise. So the depth of the heart, the absolute heart, has eyes that see clearly. That's a quote from that book, The Little Prince. It's only through the heart that one can see clearly. But that's also reference in a term that's used in Gnostic Christianity. They use the term the nu of the heart, which is the knowing of the deep heart, the vision and the understanding and the clarity that is not obscured by ego, because it is unified. So when we enter this depth of heart, of course, healing qualities just blow through as they're needed. And right now, the quality of deep compassion is so needed. Compassion for our difficulties, for the frustration or the loneliness we might be feeling, because it's not natural, and we all know it. It's hard as these times of social distancing go on and on. It's not easy, especially for those of us that live alone. It's difficult when we feel the environment is very unsettling, very chaotic. So there's compassion that's needed for just the humanity of all of that, for the suffering and the difficulties of all of that. And there's compassion needed to face the ugliness, to face the distortions without making it worse with our minds. To understand that what we see presented back to us, that is hard to look at, that is ugly and painful and distorted, is our suffering, our human suffering, our collective suffering. And that really what's coming through every night or every day through our news feed really represents humanity's prayer list, really represents what needs to be healed, what needs to be seen, what needs to be addressed, what needs to be met with and from love. So I'm not talking about a sentimental kind of love. This depth of spaciousness, of compassion, has no problem with, at the same time, taking a stand for what we feel to be important. It certainly doesn't hesitate to vote. It doesn't hesitate to listen to the innate wisdom that might be asking us to speak up or make a change or address something in an honest way. But it can do so in a way that's non-violent. And so this is how we become more artful, more spiritually graceful and mature human being. We can sit there in the apex of paradox and of divergent levels of understanding and consciousness and truly be of service through our quality of presence. Sometimes it's not what we say that really brings forth the grace. Sometimes it's our way of being that does the talking. We see this embodied in some of the great stories that we all know, such as the story of Jesus on the cross and the women who were there. And so in a way, when we look at the role of those disciples who were able to stay present in that situation that must have been incredibly hard to tolerate. I mean, can you imagine like having to stay or being able to stay when the most beautiful being you've ever known, the one you've loved more than ever before, the person who has given you more than you could possibly ever thank them for, has been falsely accused, unjustly, brutally humiliated and murdered before your very eyes, and you can't do a single thing about it? That's one of the hardest things for all of us to stay present with things that we know are really unjust, are really spiritually not in alignment with the deepest truth, are really some kind of violation of a basic human right. Very, very painful and difficult, and there's a lot of that here in our midst right now. How can we stay present with love and not go crazy with that? How can we tolerate what feels absolutely intolerable? So you've heard me, if you've studied with me before, invite you to ground more substantially in that within you which is never rocked and doesn't change. To take in not just the ground of this earth that is physically sustaining and nourishing and supporting your life right now, but to recognize that the earth that is so nourishing and generous and holding us all is really the mere tip of the iceberg of the holding presence, that the ground of our being that is infinite, that gives us infinite ground, infinite capacity to stay present, even with things that don't make any sense, even with things that feel so impossible, and to turn our heart towards whatever arises within ourselves and in our situation. That is really the kind of spiritual musculature I feel we need right now. That's what I practice as I watch the news. I deepen in my presence. I take in the fact of the ground underneath me. I recognize and remember the support is infinite, to stay present and let the heart open into that depth that is prior to me and you. Ramana called it the heart cave of absolute love, the place of the I. That was his term for the true self. I. It was like I before a me. That's really what he was meaning. And so it's that depth of the heart that really is universal and infinite. It's a birthing chamber for your most noble and beautiful qualities that make you most fully divine and fully human to birth themselves deeper into our world that could sure do with that. So let's start right here and now. Whatever is hard for you to stay present with and feel in yourself, whatever reactions and habits you so wish weren't there but are, what if you just stop judging yourself for that right now? What if you really let go of your concepts of where you think you should be and just open your heart, just be present with that part of yourself. Open and soften and allow it. Accept even the things about yourself that you think are unacceptable. That's just a thought. Just be here, right where you are, with no commentary. Opening your heart to your own suffering. And opening your heart to the suffering, the distortion, ignorance, hurt, hate, fear, pain, grief, loss, all the things that are here that are hard, that you of yourself don't know how to address. What if you don't have to try to address those things? But what if you allow them, all these impossible sufferings, and all that you feel about what's happening in our collective, what if you let it all rest in that depth of your heart that is as vast and as quiet and as spacious as the galaxy itself? Here, there is help and love beyond what we can even understand. So let us ask for that help to come to the foreground, to help us be here in this depth of the heart that is not yours or mine, that belongs to the Absolute, where we can all rest and find refuge, and where the healing and the strength we need can flow like a river through us, pervading our being and pervading our world.